Welcome to the Small Church Podcast, where faith, community, and ministry intersect in the unique context of smaller congregations. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and I'm thrilled to be joined by two men who are convinced they're a little bit more talented than I am.
That is right. I'm Robert Kill, one of those supposedly more talented guys, co-host and fellow small church leader. Together, we're here to explore the challenges, triumphs, and inspiring stories within the tight-knit communities that make up our smaller churches.
And I'm Bruce Montgomery, the one here to bring even more to the table than these two and offer a unique perspective to our conversation.
So whether you believe this talent hierarchy or not, you're in for a treat. If you're a pastor, a church member, or just curious about the world of leadership, you're in the right place.
Each episode, we dive into topics that matter to you, from innovative ministry ideas to navigating the unique dynamics of a smaller congregation.
So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's journey together through the wonderful tapestry of small church life.
This is the Small Church Podcast.
Well, welcome back to the Small Church Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Marr, and we are continuing this week with part 2 of our discussion with author and storyteller Stephen James. Last week, we began discussing some of the key components that go into crafting a compelling story and a compelling sermon. So this week, we're going to continue on with our conversation with Stephen, and we're just going to jump right back in where we left off last week. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conversation with author and storyteller Stephen James. All right, so Stephen, we want to switch gears a little bit now. We've got much more that we want to get into with this conversation on story and the art of writing, crafting, delivering your sermons. We haven't even touched on some of the delivery stuff yet, so we want to get into that, but wanted to take a little bit of a break to get inside the mind of a master storyteller and find out what inspires a master storyteller. So we're going to dive into Pastor's Picks.
And now, Pastor's Picks. What are we reading? What are we watching? What are we listening to? Does anyone really care? Probably not. But we will tell you anyways.
All right, so Stephen, what are you into right now? Anything that you're reading, anything that you're watching, listening to right now that really has grabbed your attention and piqued your creativity or curiosity?
I mean, recently I saw this movie called Inside Out 2, which I actually really enjoyed. I felt like it was honest about life, which I thought was powerful. And it wasn't just a typical message like follow your heart or whatever. It was like, yeah, our identity is partly from the good things that we, think about ourselves and the positives, but also the negatives and memories help shape us. And I don't know, I kind of dialed into it and I enjoyed that film. So that was kind of fun. What about you guys? What have you been watching?
Man, it's all baseball all the time at our house. I mean, we've been watching the College World Series, watching some MLB, watching NBA playoffs, a little bit of the NHL playoffs. It's just been a lot of sports. I watched a couple of movies. I watched the new Hitman movie. It was average on Netflix. I watched most of the John Wick stuff with my boys recently. Earlier, you were talking about things that just seem to be aimlessly just murdering and killing. That seems to be on that end of the spectrum. But yeah, so kind of quiet movie TV at the house right now. A lot more sports, which is a shift for me.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of listening to podcasts, and I've gone down some crazy rabbit trails. I get most of my podcast recommendations from Amanda, my wife, and we've been listening to this podcast, Sunlight, that is giving all of the updates and investigative research into the J.P. Miller situation, the pastor from South Carolina. That's been very crazy. And then the other one that I'm really excited about that, Robert, you and I were talking a little bit off mic about is the Lights On podcast that released a few weeks ago that is Carl and Laura Lentz stepping out of 4 years of really living in secrecy, and not secrecy, but in hiding, I would say, and now coming out and telling their story. Carl Lentz, the former pastor of Hillsong Church in New York City, that Hulu documentary done about him and a couple of other documentaries, was one of the big celebrity pastors that then had a pretty major fall and he and his wife, who their marriage stayed together, and they've been working through it for the last 4 years, and they've now released a podcast that they're just it's not them coming out to defend themselves, to tell their story. It's really saying, here's what we went through as leaders in a church. Here's what we experienced. And we know that there are a lot of other people out there that have maybe gone through this or are going through this. And we hope that our story and maybe some of the things that we've learned and are continuing to learn along the way could help someone out in that. And that's been really great. Really enjoyed that. And looking forward to continuing to listen and dive into that. I think that it has a lot of great insights into what it means to be a leader in the Christian community, and how to deal with church hurt and some of the things that inevitably come with being a leader within the Christian community. It also was the #1 podcast in Apple Podcasts for the month of May, with over, like, I read you the stat, something like 180 million impressions on Apple Podcasts, something just ridiculous. So good to see that they're doing well, that their marriage is doing well, continuing to work. And so that's been something that I've really, really enjoyed listening to. It's painful at times, but their vulnerability, honesty has been really refreshing, and I enjoy it. I would highly encourage that to any of our listeners out there. Lights on Carl and Laura Lentz.
There you go.
There you go. Lots of baseball too.
I saw this other show that I just thought I'd throw out there. It's on, I can't remember, maybe YouTube, but I think you can watch it on Tubi or something. It's called Exemplum. Did you guys see this show, Exemplum? Mm-mm. It's kind of a morality tale about this priest who kind of has this fall, and then I just thought of it when you were talking about the story and sort of his, response to it. But the guy made it. I actually had him on my podcast, The Story Blender, Paul Rowland. He made it for $10,000. Like, he made the entire movie for $10,000. And it's not a bad movie. Like, it's really pretty interesting. I think there's some language in it that might be offensive, like, to some listeners. I understand that. But it's trying to really get to the grittiness of, but it's, I guess he calls it a thriller. Some people call it a Christian thriller. But it was really, really well done. Can you imagine for what you would pay for a used car? He made a movie.
That's crazy.
That's not a bad movie. So.
Where can you find that?
I know it's on YouTube. I think that's where I watched it. I think it's also on Tubi, I think, without commercials. But Exemplum, EXEMPLUM, I think it's a Latin word. It used to be a morality tale back in the day. But anyway, pretty interesting.
My wife has been watching a show called Your Honor that she's been dying. She's been begging me to watch.
Melissa and I kind of dove back into that a little bit recently.
I think Bryan Cranston is maybe the greatest actor of the last generation. To go from playing the dad in Malcolm in the Middle to playing a meth physicist in Breaking Bad to playing Walter White. I mean, just his range in his acting abilities.
And he did
pretty
some
crazy.
Stinkers too at the beginning of his career. I ran across a Christmas movie like this past year that he played the deadbeat brother that like accidentally knocked Santa Claus out of commission and had to it was a absolutely terrible movie, but it was. I mean, I watched it. It was Christmas. What else are you gonna do? But yeah, it was. He did some really weird stuff early on, but he definitely evolved into a pretty good guy. I mean, I don't know that he's any Daniel Day-Lewis or anything like that.
Huge baseball fan as well.
Yeah, he did some voiceover stuff and narrating for MLB playoffs.
Yeah,
last year.
massive Dodgers fan, which makes me love him anymore.
Yeah.
All right. So that is Pastor's Picks.
That was Pastor's Picks.
All right, so let's dive back into this discussion that we were having with Stephen earlier. What I want to talk about is how you can let's move from the structure to the actual delivery of your sermon, because most of our audience are people out here that are writing sermons every week. They're delivering sermons every week, and we've all seen people that either their content is really great, but their delivery is really suffering, or you can tell they do great on stage. They have a really dynamic personality and presence, but their content just doesn't make any sense. Stephen, in your work with so many different people and being a performance storyteller, what do you say to someone who wants to become not only better at writing and crafting their messages, but also delivering their messages?
Well, I actually think of an acronym whenever I teach on delivery, which is pretty easy. It's just the word CATS, C-A-T-S. But if you remember those four things, these four things affect delivery. And a lot of times when people aren't delivering, well, it's because they're leaving one of these four out. And so obviously one is the context. What's the context you're telling this story in? Is it a small group? Is it a sermon on Sunday morning? What are the expectations when people come to the event? And sometimes people will tell a story that would be great for a small group, but they don't take context into consideration. And people are like, that didn't really, fell flat or whatever in this other context. Second is the audience. Who is listening? So taking that into consideration is huge. I can give you a quick example. When I was in college, there's this girl that I liked. And so one day I finally got up the nerve to ask her out for ice cream. So we go out for ice cream. And I start telling her about my life, like just, trying to show off or whatever, impress her, And finally, after like 20 minutes, she goes, Steve, can I tell you something? I'm thinking maybe she wants to ask me out for the next time, right? And she goes, can I tell you something? I was like, sure, what's that? And she goes, I feel more like your audience than your friend. It was powerful because it really reminded me that I'm more comfortable performing a story. And I was performing my life story for this young woman instead of having a conversation. So there's this continuum between conversation and performance, and expectations are different along the way. And so I didn't take my listener into consideration or the social context into consideration. I ended up really probably offending her and just kind of turning her off. So context and audience. What's that?
There was no second date.
There was no second date. No, I didn't end up marrying her and living happily ever after. I met someone else instead. But so context is important. Think about the context. What are expectations of the audience? It's two. The third is the teller is you. What are your gifts? Maybe you're very dramatic. That's great. Maybe you're not. You're just like, you can sit in a stool and, speak for 45 minutes and everyone's enthralled. So don't try to be someone you're not. If you're not really dramatic, don't try to be, I don't know, whoever it might be. So lean into your strengths that God's given to you. And then, finally is the content or the story, So context, audience, teller, and story. Like I feel like if those four things come together, it can really affect our delivery. And if we leave one out, like we're like, okay, I'm going to prepare this, but we don't think about our audience, or we don't think about our own giftedness, or maybe we don't think about the context or the actual story itself, then the delivery, I think, ends up suffering.
Yeah, no, this is so good. And I think the thing, there's got to be such a wide range of people. There's got to be that are listening to this. There's got to be people who are very storytelling based. There's people who are very exegetical. We're going to work word by word through every verse. We're going to make this thing happen this way. And then there's some people who kind of probably balance out the middle of that. Tony, I think you would probably be a balance because you like to teach exegetical, but you're a storyteller. I definitely want to be that way. I think I bounce. I think I don't always hit the sweet spot of both of those. Like what, Stephen, this is so good. And some of this probably could feel really overwhelming to a young communicator or somebody that God's called to plant a church, that they've started a church in their town and it's a small church and there's a few people. I'm kind of looking at this and I'm going, okay, like this is going to affect everything I do in the week. But what would you kind of say is that if you're starting today and you can only grab one of these 6 aspects of a story, or you can only grab one of the cat steps, or you can grab, one of the hook, book, look, took thing. I mean, if you've got one step here, where do you feel like the best place to start is if somebody's really new as a communicator, or maybe they've just found themselves really struggling to piece this together?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question. I think the first thing that actually comes to mind is don't try to teach a 3-point sermon, teach a 1-point sermon. And then look at that point from different perspectives. Like maybe it is about God, God's, eternal love for us or whatever. Instead of trying to explain it, try to look at it in a way that you can, it's like a prism where you're going to look at it from different perspectives and then allow people to sort of tie together those moments and, those thoughts really into, I feel like a lot of people start by asking, how can I explain this? And so that's one thing. And I would say sometimes when people explain stuff, it just bores me. So I would ask instead of how can I explain it? How can I help people discover it? And if you just shift the opening, question that you ask, instead of how can I explain this to how can I help people discover this, it just gives you a completely different groundwork. Is that the word? I can't remember groundwork, but footing to move forward on. And very often just that simple difference, in perspective can allow you to be a little bit more creative and imaginative in what you're sharing.
I think we underestimate the work of the Holy Spirit so many times, and we feel like we have to get so deep into explaining these things. And like if I kind of walk through this and I kind of get this and I've got it, and I do think it's important we understand what we're teaching. But I think sometimes we get so busy trying to tell every aspect of what we're reading word by word through this thing that we forget the fact that Jesus tells stories and that we need to lean in that space is wise, and then trusting the work of the Holy Spirit in the hearts of people to move that we don't have that power. We can't change people. We're just to be faithful to present this text and the scriptures as we read and study, and the Spirit works in us.
Yeah, a couple things that I want to touch on really quick is we just had the conversation on our last episode, Robert, about the differences in cultures that can be just mere miles apart. Stephen, we were talking about that you go 45 minutes down the road to Asheville, North Carolina, and it's a completely different world there. And we can experience that. Sometimes we have churches in our communities here that the culture of the church with inside the walls doesn't accurately represent the community outside of their walls, even within a 1-mile radius, that they're silos that have really isolated themselves from their community. And I loved what you said in the part of your cat there about understanding your audience, that we have to understand who it is that we're speaking to. We have to understand not only who they are, but also their needs. We have to understand what they're feeling, what they're going through, their needs and context. And we need to tailor our message to the specific needs and context of the audience. Knowing your audience, knowing who they are, knowing who you're speaking to, and making your message relevant to their lives is critical to engagement.
Yeah, one of the first things I ask when I'm preparing a message is, who am I writing this for, or who am I telling this to? So if it's a story, if it's a book, I'm trying to think about my readers. If it's a message, I'm trying to think about my listeners, like who are they, why are they here, and who's the I got started telling stories when I was in 8th grade. I entered the speech contest, and so I was like, I had this monologue from the perspective of a worm about the importance of soil conservation, And so like I had these little cards and I'd, gone through it like 100 times in front of the mirror, my little cards. I got up to perform it. And I mean, I just blew them away. All I can say is I got third place there were 2 people in the conference, in the competition, but no, I didn't blow them away. They're like staring at me like, what is going on? Because I had prepared that story or speech, I would say, for a mirror. Like I was really good at doing it in front of a mirror, but not in front of actual people. Like I hadn't taken the judges into consideration when I was preparing for it. So this whole idea of preparing in front of a mirror, I feel like if that's helpful for you, fine. But remember, you're not actually speaking to a mirror. You're actually speaking to real people that are coming there, maybe to your church for the first time, or maybe for the 1,000th time or whatever. And think about where they're at. And very often the struggles that you can identify in your life are probably things that they've dealt with as well, whether it's search for meaning, acceptance, the hope for freedom, the desire for peace, all of those things, those universal human desires, Jesus talked about and Jesus related to in his stories. And I feel like they can be powerful bridges to help people connect with your message and with, God's word.
Yeah, last thing I want to touch on really quick. We're running out of time here, and I know that everyone's got other things they've got to get off and do, but I could continue this conversation forever. One of the critical components that I think is missed when it comes to public speaking and people who do public speaking a lot, in a lot of what we do as an organization in our consulting is we talk about the 3 angles of pastoral ministry, of vocational ministry. And we've talked about
working the angles, aren't you?
Working the angles. We've talked about this a lot, that you've got the preaching aspect, the teaching aspect, the being an effective communicator. You've got the leadership aspect, and you've got the pastoral aspect. Anytime that I sit down with someone and say, okay, you've got these 3 things, no one's great at all 3 of them. Maybe you're good at 2 of them. No one's good at all 3. What's your best? Almost inevitably, I'd say probably 70 to 80% of the time they say, oh, my best, I'm best. I'm a great preacher. I'm a really great preacher. Everybody thinks they're great at that because their mom told them they're the best they've ever heard. I love doing elementary schools with storytelling, and I love doing youth conferences as a speaker because every time you do a middle school conference or you do an elementary, the kids flood up to you and say, you're the best storyteller I've ever heard in my life. You're the best. And then when you're doing like a week-long conference, it really strokes your ego, and you're the first guy at the beginning of the week until you stick around. And the speaker for the second night, the same kid goes up to that, you're the best speaker I've ever heard. And then the third, you're the best. I thought I was, and then he was. And everyone thinks they're great because they got a good comment from grandma who told them they're good. But how many times do we actually get feedback from someone who's willing to be honest with us about our communication ability? And Stephen, one of the things that I love about you is several times you've called me and said, hey, I'm working on this new story. Can you come over and let me do it for you? And you seek that out as a communicator, and you flat out told me, be brutally honest. I'm in the crafting phase of this. I'm looking to make it better. How can I make it better? And that to me shows great maturity and that you want to be the best that you can be. And so how important is incorporating feedback into our ability to continually improve as communicators?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think at certain stages in the preparation, it can be more helpful. Like if you're just getting started with an idea and like you say, be brutally honest, and someone is, it can like squash your confidence right off the bat. Like, oh man, I'm no good. But so being as specific as possible when you ask for feedback, I think is very important. So if you're working on a message and you say, I'm really trying to tell this story, like, does it come across as I'm bragging? Okay, then tell the story. No, it doesn't come across as you're bragging. Okay, good, thanks. Or I'm working on this, message, and can you, give me any feedback as far as what I'm teaching from Scripture? Do you feel like it's faithful, or am I, going too far in what I'm what I'm saying. And so very specific questions can be super helpful. And then as far as delivery, I actually, if someone comes up to me and say, you stink, that was really bad, that really affects me. Like, I don't have thick skin. I'm not good with that. So don't do that, by the way. But like if you're working with someone one-on-one or, and it doesn't take that long. That's the thing. It's like literally you could videotape your story in 10 minutes and send it to someone. In 10 minutes, they could respond to you. And just in 20 minutes, you could probably have some super helpful feedback. So it isn't like it takes hours and hours and hours to do. It's just that most of us don't take the time to do it.
Because we don't want to hear that maybe we're doing something that someone doesn't like or it could be improved upon. I think that hurts our feelings.
Yeah, I mean, we had one church I was at that if you were speaking on Sunday morning, on Thursday after lunch, you had to preach your sermon to about 5 people, and it was brutal. It was on a stopwatch. We had 5 services, so it was you. I mean, you had a time frame. We had decent parking, but we didn't have enough to turn around, especially the 2 or 3 middle services that were really heavily attended. And it was brutal. And I remember one of the last times before I left there, I'd spoke, and one of the guys said, "You have 3 great sermons." To go back to one of your points from a minute ago, you should choose one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I'm like, this is Thursday. I've worked for 3 weeks on this, and I'm Thursday, and I've got to preach on Sunday. And I'm going and thankfully the crew was brutal, but they were also the most generous, open-handed people on the planet. And they would sit and like work and just let stew kind of thicken. They would work with you in that space as well. But there's just not, and so thick skin is something I have. I'd almost rather you tell me what I'm doing wrong than what I'm doing right. Like, tell me if it stinks, because if it's okay, I'm going to keep doing things that way. But I've had to kind of learn, Stephen, as you're talking there, like everybody's not me, and I'm sure there's a little bit of lightheartedness to what you're saying. I'm sure you take criticism. I mean, you've got publishers and friends and a million other people. I'm sure you take criticism a lot. I mean, you just have to with what you do. But I understand everybody doesn't take the same way. But that's a really valuable thing that you're talking about, of just being able to hear that and have somebody who can push back and help you be better.
Yeah. All right, Stephen, we want to give you some time to talk to, we've got about 1,000 or so people that listen to this show every week. I'm sure that they would love to find out more about how they can get in touch with you, utilize your resources, your vast knowledge. We've had a couple of other authors on our show before, and they've said that sure, you can go to Amazon and buy their books, but they'd much rather you buy them from them directly so that they get more of the proceeds. How can people get in contact with you? I also know you're doing some writing intensives, some conferences, some retreats, that if you're listening out there and you would like to be an author like Stephen, fiction, nonfiction, that he offers coaching for that. Stephen, give us your whole big rundown of how our listeners can get in contact with you, how they can purchase your books, how they can bring you out to speak for their events, and how maybe they can come attend one of your seminars.
I appreciate it. So the book that comes to mind that I think would probably be most helpful for speakers and preachers is The Art of the Tale. And you can really get that wherever you might order your books. And I would appreciate wherever it's fine. Like, you don't have to get it from me. And then, the second thing is my website, stephenjames.net, kind of has all of my books. If you're into thrillers, if you're into novels, different types of writing books, you could check that out, stephenjames.net. And then I do have this writing conference coming up in November here in Tennessee, in Jonesboro, Tennessee, for novelists. So if you're sort of like, I kind of want to learn how to write a novel, you might check out, it's called novelwritingintensive.com. Has all the information about that, but it's limited to 12 people, so it's really intimate, 4-day conference. And of course, if you have a conference or a church and you're looking for a speaker, you can keep me in mind. You can always email me at info@stephenjames.net. So I appreciate it, and it was a pleasure to be on your show, and thanks for all that you both are doing.
If somebody gets on Amazon right now by the time this drops, could be different. You can get The Art of the Tale paperback for $6.12. That is a killer deal for what you're going to get out of that book.
There you go. Get on and purchase
deal.
that right now.
Go
Wherever
buy
you're
it
at,
right
stop
now.
what you're doing. Log on to Amazon, Stephen James, The Art of the Tale. Pick it up, purchase it, get 2 or 3, one for a friend, and make a great 4th of July gift.
Yeah,
for
get 3 or
the
4 of
friends
them
that
and
you
get some
love.
other pastors in your community and go sit around with coffee and do that.
That's great. All right, it wouldn't be the Small Church Podcast if we didn't close out with our favorite segment of the day. We're going to go into signs.
Which was my sign? Here's your sign.
All right, Stephen, I think that you had a church sign that you wanted to share with the small church audience.
This is a sign that I saw, and it says, 7 days without prayer makes 1 week.
Do you get it, Robert?
I get it.
Makes 1 week.
Yeah, not
7 days without prayer makes 1 week. Yeah, that was a good one. That was a very good one. All right. Well, that is all the time we have for this edition of the Small Church Podcast. We want to thank our friend Stephen James for joining us today. And again, remind you that if you would like to find out more about Stephen's writings, his speaking, or how he can help you in becoming a best-selling author, novelist, you can visit stephenjames.net or reach out info@stephenjames.net to connect with him directly. Also, you can find him on all of your social media channels, so be sure to go and find author Stephen James, speaker Stephen James, storyteller Stephen James, and be sure to follow him on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, formerly known as X, or X, formerly known as Twitter, and be sure to follow him on all of those platforms. We also want to encourage you to find the Small Church Podcast, subscribe to our show wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, like us on Facebook, join the conversation with us by commenting or shooting us an email. Find us at higherministries.com. We would love to continue the conversation. On behalf of Robert Kell, I am Tony Marr. Thanks for listening to the Small Church Podcast.